Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll call to order the November 16th, 2022 meeting of the Council of City of Springdale. I would ask that you rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
O Lord, keep us aware of our debt to those we so often take for granted, the policeman who guards our sleep, the mailman who comes to our door through the winter's cold and summer's heat, the teachers who open for us the path to wisdom, our military and veterans who defended our country. Help us to show our gratitude by constant thoughtfulness and humble service to all with whom we have contact this day. Amen.
Amen. All right, Ms. McNear, you do roll call.
Mr. Anderson? Mrs. Gantos? Here. Mr. Hawkins?
Present.
Mr. Jacobs?
Present.
Mr. Ramirez? Mrs. Sullivan-Weiskup?
Present.
Mr. Vanover?
Present. Mr. Anderson is out of town. He advised me a week or so ago, and Mr. Ramirez called this afternoon. He is under the weather and didn't want to share it with us. So, and with that, while we're at it, the council be aware that we have 3 ordinances that are emergency clauses, and they do take a majority, a super majority vote, so it would have to be 5-0 tonight since we're down 2. All right, with that, we have the minutes of November 2nd. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to adopt.
Motion second, discussion. All right, all those approving the minutes as published signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The minutes are approved with 5 affirmative votes. Okay, at this point now we'll go into committee and official reports, and first off this evening is the always welcome Mr. Coleman on civil service.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of council, good evening. The Springdale Civil Service Commission did meet on November the 3rd. Members present was myself and Mrs. Darby. Mrs. Neighbor had a planned absent and was excused. Minutes from the previous meeting were presented and approved as well. I'm happy to report this evening that things are looking pretty positive for vacancies that here today had been difficult filling. So I'll start off by indicating that the firefighter 2 EMT, firefighter 2 paramedic hiring process, that position is filled. The tax account clerk 1, that position is filled. The building department property maintenance inspector, that position is filled. The recreation programmer hiring, that position is filled. The custodian hiring process, that one is still pending and may in fact have to be reposted. Patrol officer hiring, that position is filled. And as far as the maintenance worker position is still vacant, there were 28 applications received, and those applications are being reviewed. The only other item to note is that within the finance department, the finance account clerk 2 position, which had been vacant since 2017, that position is now ready to be moved forward and filled. And the decision was to post it internally for 2 weeks. And hopefully there'll be some current employees that are interested and are qualified. And following the 2-week internal posting, interviews will take place at that point. So again, it's an opportunity to show employees that internally there are opportunities, and that we do appreciate the work. And we would go further by saying it's always good when you can feel from within and keep the morale going. So that concludes my report.
All right. Don't have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Rules and laws, Ms. Gantos.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
All right, Finance Committee, Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance Committee is going to be meeting on November 30th at 5 p.m. as we're going through budget, but no report this time.
Okay. And Planning Commission, Ms. Weisskopf.
Thank you, Mr. President. Planning Commission met in these chambers on November the 8th at 7 p.m. We had the City of Springdale Connectivity Plan, and you will hear that presentation tonight, and that did pass by a 7-0 to affirm and come to here. And that is all that I have.
Okay. Board of Health, Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. Board of Health met on November the 10th. 3 fee regulations were passed after a third reading. I've been bringing them up as regular updates. They were just annual updates for pool spas, restaurants, hotels. COVID numbers are low in the area, but there's a recent spike in RSV, respiratory virus. So far, the biggest risks are to the very young and old. Hand washing and staying home when you're sick are still always the way to go. COVID vaccinations are still available at the Health Department Thursdays, 9 to 1. I think a lot of people have heard this for years, but if you're using any street drugs, the odds continue to exist that street drugs might contain fentanyl. And overdose deaths aren't reported in the media like they have been in the past. But just in 1 week between September and October in Hamilton County, 16 overdose deaths were recorded. Food program-wise for the city, Badmo's African Market is approved. Permits are coming along there. There's a restaurant called Magnolia's Southern Table that's supposed to take over at the previous smoke location on Victoria, but there just hasn't been any activity noted recently. And then Artesanias Emotus Tipacius Garcia on Kemper Commons is moving forward. The Community Health Improvement Plan is moving forward as well with some new community surveys coming out this month. It'll be a online SurveyMonkey format, and I believe the city is going to be spreading that out through social media. All the members of council got the links as well, and the Board of Health would like us to share those as much as possible. And the bulk of the meeting was really about the renewed efforts to put pressure on our hotel vendors to clean up their act. It's been a laser focus for quite a few months now, a dedicated committee just for that topic. There's an ordinance being looked at to create a new fee schedule that I did mention last time, where if you're an inspected hotel vendor and we have to go back out on repeated occasions, that we're considering tacking some fees onto those additional inspections. So that's still in the works. There's a draft of that legislation. And then to be specific, and I spoke to the mayor about whether we specifically mentioned some of these vendors, but the focus has been on Days Inn, and they've been under new ownership, but it's just been infraction after infraction and abatement order after abatement order, and there's getting to be a point where the city is no longer going to work with that vendor. And that is coming soon. It's within weeks, not months, when that decision will have to be made. And they're also taking close looks at the Home 2 Suites and La Quinta as well. But right now the big focus is on the Days Inn, and we want them to succeed, but it's been 4 months with the same inspection issues over and over. And at Mayor, I believe you'll probably have an SOS update of some kind.
You're going to be given SOS update?
I don't want to take that. So that's all I have unless there's any questions.
Don't see any questions. Board of Zoning Appeals, Ms. Gantos.
Board of Zoning Appeals didn't meet, so there's no report.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Capital Improvements, Ms. Gantos.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Okay. Mr. Anderson's out, so we'll hold OKI until he returns. Mayor's report, Mayor Webster.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's nice to look out here and see so many smiling faces. The only time that we have this big a crowd is we're either going to raise taxes, or we're going to build sidewalks in somebody's front yard, or we're going to honor a Boy Scout. And I'm proud to say that it's the latter. We're going to honor a Boy Scout tonight. And so welcome to all of you scouts that came out to support your brother scout here today. But before I get into that, I have to say a few words about the scout that we're going to honor tonight is Ian Ewing Jackson. And before I read the proclamation and do that, I just want to say a little bit about Ian's family. I had the very distinct pleasure to serve on this council with his grandmother, Barbara Ewing, which was the first Afro-American elected to Springdale City Council back in 1988, if my record keeping is right. And so she served for one term, 88 through 92, and I had the pleasure of serving with her. She was a very productive council member, and we were not very happy when she decided not to seek re-election. But anyway, her and her husband Jimmy are here with us tonight, and I'm sure you're very proud of your grandson, and I know we are, and I'm sure all the other scouts are too. So anyway, without further ado, let me read the proclamation that I'm issuing as of this date. Whereas it has been brought to my attention that Ian Ewing Jackson received the distinguished honor of Eagle Scout at the Eagle Scout Board of Review on Tuesday, October the 11th, 2022. And whereas Ian Ewing Jackson has served as a senior patrol leader and assistant patrol leader, and whereas Ian attended the National Youth Leadership Training, which is a 6-day-long program where scouts learn leadership, communication, planning, problem solving, and teamwork. Evan did so well at this training, he was invited back to help lead the training. And whereas Ian has earned 26 merit badges, with his favorite being rifle shooting, and whereas Ian stays physically fit by participating in extracurricular activities, Ian is a strong member of the Princeton High School cross-country team. Notably, Ian was awarded second place in the total marathon, local marathon, and whereas Ian Ewing Jackson, in conjunction with the City of Springdale 2022 Bike and Pedestrian Connectivity Plan, raised funds for the purchase and installation of a commercial-grade outdoor bicycle tire pump. Ian raised $1,200 in funding by washing cars and mulching flower beds this summer. This bicycle pump will serve the community and help connect all of those who wish to visit our city, our parks, and our community center. And whereas it is my great honor to issue this proclamation, therefore I, Doral H. Webster, Mayor of the City of Springdale, do hereby proclaim Wednesday, November 16, 2022, as Ian Ewing Jackson Day in the City of Springdale, and commend this observance to our citizens. So, Ian, if you would join me down the front here. And by the way, Mr. Wilson has a presentation he wants to make.
So I was with Ian on the whole journey here, and I was with Ian on the whole journey here, and he wanted to do something like the rest of his family. They want to make an impact to their community. So we got with Mr. Yule. He fed me Ian here. We came up with the idea to collaborate with our pedestrian connectivity plan. So we took pictures of him installing this project, this bike pedestrian pump, and with the name face place where his name will be stamped for the rest of history. So he will always be in debt to the city of Springdale here. So we'd like to congratulate him. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Mom.
Well, as my grandmother would say, that apple didn't fall far from the tree. Ms. Ewing, it was good seeing you, and we all owe you a vote of thanks for the time you spent up here and served, and did your job. We appreciate it. Mayor Webster, is that
No, I have several other items.
okay?
First off, I'd just like to mention that last Friday, we had our annual Veterans Day ceremony, and for the second time in the last 4 years, we had to move it into these chambers. But I think it worked out extremely well, and most of the comments I got were very positive, that people could hear a lot better than they could with the traffic and the water flowing out there. So anyway, we hate to have to do it, but it worked out very, very well. I got a couple things. First off, I'm not real pleased about this, but I received a letter from Mr. Don Darby from our Plan Commission, and it was dated November 10th. Honorable Dora Webster, Mayor. Dear Mayor Webster, please be advised that I will be retiring as a member of the City of Springdale Plan Commission effective December 31st, 2022. Consequently, my last scheduled meeting will be December 13th, 2022. Having served several years with appointments from 3 different mayors, my service with Springdale has been a great experience. As you are aware, I've been involved in the approval process of many projects within the city. Most recently, several housing projects will conceivably double the city's population. This serves as evidence that Springdale continues to be great and growing. Best wishes to all our staff, business organizations, and most of all, our residents. Respectfully, Don Darby, Plan Commission. And we're going to sorely miss Don. He's, like he indicates, he's served 3 mayors, starting with Mayor French back in the early 80s. My predecessor, Mayor Pittman, and then he's been with me since day one, since December the 1st of '95. So we're going to sorely miss him, and I will be bringing forth a resolution for a replacement sometime in the next 2 or 3 meetings here. And also, it's with a lot of sorrow, I have to announce the passing of Mr. Ken Snyder, who was a long-term law director for the city of Springdale for over 30 years, starting back in the early 70s. Ken was here for all those years in our very formative years of the city of Springdale, and I think a lot of the people, several of the people up here, I think, served with Ken. So it's with great sorrow that we announce his passing. Tree lighting ceremony is coming up November 28th at 7 p.m. It's always a big event. I think the last thing I want to talk about is SOS, and we had a meeting this afternoon. It was a very, very good meeting. We talked 90% of the time about the Christmas program. It's rounding into shape. We're still looking for donor families. So if you would like to sponsor a child, please give us a call at 346-5725. Or if you want to make a cash donation, that would be great. We've got people that will go out and do the shopping. We're trying to service at least 100 families. I think we're up to close to 90 as I speak. We also are looking for, like I said, sponsor families. I think we've only got about half of that, about 45 sponsors. So we're still looking for some help along the way there. But anyway, the program is going very well. Now, we also have last year we introduced a new event called the Santa 5K Run. And it's going to take place this year at December the 3rd, 9 a.m. down at the community center. And so it'll be a 5K run. Elizabeth Johnson is doing a great job of organizing that. She gave us a rundown today. I think they've got like 4 or 5 stations along the way where people will be singing and cheering people on and issuing refreshments and that kind of stuff. And then this year she's added, and we're really excited about this, she's added a vendor village. And this is for anyone that wants to sell some wares, if they want to sell baked goods, candies, knickknacks, Christmas decorative things. Please attend. The booth, I think, is $20. Charlie, is that?
It's $40 for to be a vendor, but then it's $20 to run the race.
Okay, 20 to run the race, 40 for a booth, and we're hoping, I think right now she's got 15, I think, 13 vendors already signed up. She's hoping to have 25 vendors. I asked her, I says, can you accommodate that many? She says, oh, yeah, we can handle it. So we're really looking forward not only to the vendors, but we need some customers for those vendors. So if you're so inclined, come out, have some hot chocolate, some hot coffee, whatever. We're gonna have a couple of food trucks there, one for popcorn, I understand. And we're gonna have the Princeton choir is gonna be there. So it's just gonna be a festive morning, starting at 9 a.m. on December the 3rd, and it goes until 1 p.m. So it's 4 hours of fun and games. So we look forward to seeing all of you out there. And all the proceeds go to to SOS. I mean, if a vendor, what they take in, they keep naturally, but the $40 fee goes to SOS along with the $20 participation fee in the 5K run. Did I leave anything out, Julie and Charlie? No? Okay. Believe it or not, that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Clerk of Council Finance Director, Ms. McNear.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I give my report, I just wanted to comment on the 5K race. If you're registering through Eventbrite, which is how you have to do it, be prepared because you have to be very quick. I started signing up today on my phone, and I didn't have my credit card with me. I walked into the other room, pulled it out of my purse, walked back, and it said, your ticket has expired. So you have to be prepared, and you better be fast when you're signing up. All right, so on to the general fund report for receipts through October 31st. Based on a net budget of $21.218 million, we have received $21.513 million, which is 101% of our anticipated receipts. And those receipts are made up of 5 general fund receipt sources, and they are earnings tax, real estate taxes, paramedic services, local government funds, and mayor's court, for a subtotal of $20.082 million, which is 93%. And for the expenditures through October 31st, based on a net budget of $22.149 million, we have spent $16.634 million, which is 74% of the budget. And our ending balance through October 31st in the general fund is $9.509 million. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Administrator's report, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I would add on to what the mayor was talking about on the 5K run, is just to let people know that the vast majority of the kids and adults actually walk. And the community centers, our rec department's very flexible. They don't care if you just walk a portion of it. So as long as you show up, and it is a nice event. Just a couple things. We do have a few part-time positions open. Maintenance worker, customer service representative, fitness instructor, and facilities maintenance worker. If you have interest in that or know somebody who may potentially be interested in one of those positions, contact our HR administrator, Stephanie Morgan. Just wanted to give a report. Over the last couple months, our police department has been monitoring East Crescentville, and I thought I'd give an update. Of the during that 60-day period, 47 days were reported. The speed limit there is actually 35, and as we commonly find out, Mr. President and our elected officials here, the average speed during that time was 25.98 for the majority of the time, and then the rest of the time it was monitored was 26.87. So we find that about every time, even though a lot of people say there's speeding going on. So the speeding's a lot less than people may realize, but it's the abusers that make it seem like it's much quicker. And they roughly had about 3,000 cars per day that was being monitored. So that's all I have, unless there's questions.
Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had a quick question about when we do the speed monitoring, that's when there is a sign that is up? Yes. Because I've always had this curiosity. Doesn't the sign, by its nature, cut down on the speed? Whereas if we did it in a more, where there's no sign, to me that would be a true measure of what's happening.
Well, if you would like to volunteer and go out and hand do those,
I'm sorry?
if you'd like to volunteer to monitor those, you can.
No,
But there
it's the
is-
only way to monitor it.
There
to
is
include a sign that
absolutely
tells
treat-
the- Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
Okay.
The visibility of the signs, much like the visibility of a state trooper on the interstate, even if you're going the speed limit, you will hit your brakes naturally just because, oh, I see something. So you're absolutely correct.
Ms. Weisskopf?
I was just ask a quick question of, because I know that when it was over on News by my house, sometimes it would show me how fast I was going, and other times it had nothing. Is it still capturing how fast I'm going, even if it doesn't tell me how fast I'm going?
That's a great question. The answer to that is yes, sort of for the reason that you're alluding to, Councilman Jacobs, is that it continues to monitor and read even though it's not lighting up.
Mr. Jacobs?
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify the point, like, if the goal is to collect data, I would prefer the best data is to have no visible sign, in my opinion. Now, the sign is going to have a deterrent effect, but if you're gathering data, a deterrent effect messes up your data, right?
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess the point is, if there's a less conspicuous way to capture radar, that may render some other information or data for us. But then along the lines also, the opposite, we have had some residents come in and say that folks will do the opposite. They'll try to see if they can hit the high score and see how fast they can go.
Well, while you're talking about Crescentville Road, I'm happy to announce that I acquired another nail, so I think I'm sitting at 18 and counting, so.
Mr. President, I had one of our employees in the administration tell me this individual lives outside the city, and she shared with me that she found a large amount of nails at the end of their driveway, and she's heard us talk and she observes the council meetings and stuff, and said, unbelievable, it's happening to me and I don't live in the city. So I have no answer to that.
I know for a
unfortunately.
fact that, it's not just here. I know Westchester has been battling same issue in some other municipalities too, so. But, it's kind of like the Christmas story. You just keep adding on. You good?
Thank you.
All right. Law Director's Report, Mr. Braun.
Thank you, Mr. President. No report.
Okay. Engineers Report, Mr. Riggs.
Thank you. I'll be brief tonight. The Northland Boulevard project, we submitted a fee proposal for the shared use path addition. In fact, the first reading for that ordinance is tonight. The project will shift a little bit with that shared use path addition. So revised stage 2 plans and final right-of-way plans will actually plan to be submitted in February of 2023. Then with final plans being submitted a year later in February 2024, with the project going to bid in May of 2024, which is consistent with the schedule OKI allowed us to push back from the bidding schedule from first quarter of 2024 to the last quarter of 2024. The Kemper Road CSX Bridge Repair Project, we have a pre-construction meeting on November 21st at 9 a.m. That contract was approved to be awarded to Pruce Construction last month. And that's all I had.
Okay, thanks, sir. All right, and we're at the rental program, and Mr. Anderson's out, so I will, we had a meeting November the 9th. We have legislation that was presented in near final form. We are meeting again on December the 2nd with the hotel group, and the plan is to bring that legislation before council on December the 7th for a first reading, and then the 21st for a public hearing and second reading. I'm very pleased with what we have and where we are with it. it far surpassed any idea when we started we would have something in this form this quickly. So I'm pleased to report that. Ms. Weisskopf, you got anything else to add? All right. With that, communications. Ms. McNear, are there any communications this evening?
Nothing this evening, Mr. President. Thank you.
Okay. All right, and at this point, I would advise council, before we open the floor for comments from the audience, that we are currently considering legislation that will prohibit letters, emails, or texts from third parties who aren't here at the meeting from being read into the record by others. The reason for this proposed rule is pretty clear. The authors of these communications aren't here to verify they wrote them, and the authors can't be confronted or cross-examined about the substance of their communications. This does not promote efficiency or transparency. As a result, I would encourage members of council not to respond to any such communications that are presented from people not present at the meeting. With that, the floor of council is open for communications from the audience.
Hello, Julie Matheny. I just wanted to give a report. Charter Revision had their annual required meeting this evening. All 5 members were in attendance. Jeff Singleton is our newest member, replacing Mr. Jacobs. He was sworn in. I was unanimously elected chairperson again, and Michelle Gilmore will be our secretary. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Floor still open? Second call. Please sign in and identify yourself.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kevin Huff. I live at 12090 Elk Ridge Drive. I apologize if you have trouble hearing me tonight. I have a sinus infection, but I knew it was important to be here. Some of you know me. I am the author of the letter that seemed to have caused this council so much consternation over the past month. So tonight I'm here to present myself to this council for cross-examination. Debates and discussions are the basis of our democracy. Cross-examination is something you do to a criminal, not a concerned citizen. I will address the letter for discussion tonight. However, I want to address some disturbing discussion from last meeting first. After Mr. Anderson, who's not here, fulfilled his promise to bring up the letter, President Vanover went on a tirade about unsigned letters and verifying who wrote them. This has probably been a problem since the first letter was written in 500 BC, but society has taken to accepting letters if they come signed from a proper address and make contextual sense to the issue being addressed. My letter covered all 3. Had there still been a question of the validity of my letter, a staffer from administration could have completed the arborist task, as described by Mr. Braun, of calling me to verify the letter. Lord knows other members of administration know my phone number and love to use it anytime my grass grows. No call was made. However, interestingly enough, the validity of my letter was not questioned by administration. Mr. Huell and Ms. Browder had no trouble verifying the email and responding accordingly. Only certain people on this council had a problem. Then President Vanover began rambling about accusations in letters and having no ability to respond to or cross-examine an accuser. That's fair. Just the mention of an accusation can have negative effects on council members of the council in general, regardless of whether they are true or not. My letter made no such accusations. It only contained 6 questions. My letter is not a form letter. Mr. Braun brought up form letters you received in the past, and I agree that they're not appropriate for city council meetings. This was obviously not a form letter, as Mr. Anderson pointed out. These questions were very well thought out and detailed. Finally, there's a precedent set for letters being sent in and read for council. Notwithstanding the discussion of the last meeting, as far back as online records indicate, on May 15, 1996, a letter was written and read to council but I couldn't find a single instance where a letter was censored by council. We've led letters from Duke Energy, 2 in the past year, that have had absolutely nothing to do with council. But council decided to censor a letter concerning the budget, how the money was spent, and clarification on issues that are brought up during that meeting. So we've established the validity of the letter signed by me. It came from my personal email address, which I had previously used for communicating with administration. It was contextually relevant to the questions I had posed before this council 2 weeks prior. It was not aggressive, disrespectful, or accusatory. It was not a form letter, and it followed the precedent set decades ago for letters to be read by council. But it was censored by this council and these chambers. I would like to know by whom and why. Before you answer, I also know that it was a surprise to multiple members of this council that the letter was not read, meaning that it was not a unanimous decision of the council not to read this, but a small faction of council who's trying to suppress the voice of a resident. Now again, I will ask, who and why was the letter suppressed?
Mr. Jacobs?
I'm glad you could make it out tonight. We have heard you speak. Excuse me, I might have the same thing you're talking about. But we've seen you before us 3 times so far. We all did receive your letter, and I'm going to respectfully counter some of the things you just mentioned. This is not any definition of censorship. I know it feels that way to you, but your letter wasn't censored. There is not a right to send a message to a government body and then expect that government body to express your views in public. That doesn't exist under any reading of any amendment in any constitution. And so I feel like we've got a misunderstanding here. Now, what you are correct about is the city had a precedent of reading letters, and you have every right to be, disappointed that we might consider not doing that anymore. And I understand that. But I totally disagree with your use of the word censorship here. This has nothing to do with the First Amendment. 0. And if you want to, discuss that further with me, I'd be happy to back up what I'm saying. But I really have a problem with that word because it's just not it at all.
Ms. Weisskopf?
Thank you. I want to absolutely echo what he's saying, and you can come talk to him about that kind of stuff afterwards. He's a government teacher, not me. So he's definitely one to talk to about the First Amendment rights. I want to actually talk to you when you said that there were some people on city council that knew about it ahead of time. I don't know, except for maybe Tom, because he's the president, I don't know of any of the city council members that knew about this ahead of time, other than we got the letter, we all received the letter, and we were not told, yes, we will read this, or no, we will not. That was never a discussion that I had. I don't know about, I can only speak for myself. It was never a discussion that I had. When I read the email, I actually reached out to someone in administration and I said, I don't know how to answer any of this. These are all administrative questions. These are things that you guys handle on your end. Do we need to respond to this? And I was told, no, we don't need to respond to it, that administration was handling it. So as far as I was concerned, I thought that you were getting what you wanted. I thought you were getting your answers. I didn't realize that what you wanted was for someone to read it. I didn't realize that that was the important part more, from us. I didn't understand that that was a big part of it, and I'm sorry that you felt that was a big part that we didn't do for you. I had no idea that reading it was more important than the answers. The answers to me I thought were important, so when administration told me that they had handled it, I thought it was over. I had no idea that it was still a situation, and I guess I'm sorry for that because I did not know. I don't think anybody really knew that that was the issue. So I am sorry for that. I did not know. But as far as I was concerned, I thought it was being taken care of by administration because they were administrative questions. That was just my answer to you. Thanks.
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for being interested in what's going on in the process. That's always good. Okay, so when you look at the agenda, we have not one but 2 opportunities for folks to speak and address council. It doesn't mean that's the only way for folks to reach council, the administration, or elected officials. So that everybody's clear in terms of procedure and practices, at no point in time ever since 2009 when I got up here has council, 7 council members made a decision on what letters would be read. It's not something that the council does, okay? We sit here, there's times where a letter may come through that in the past we may not have even seen. We hear it for the first time when it's read by Ms. McNair. So council doesn't make a decision on what gets read or doesn't get read. As it's been stated, I think I said it probably at the last meeting, when your letter was not read, I was surprised it wasn't read just based on our precedent, but, you know, we're hearing some, and there's been some discussion as to what the thought process was in that situation. But I want to be clear that it's not something that council sits before a meeting and says, we're going to read this letter, not read that letter. That doesn't happen. You know, when there's been discussion about a new policy, and there's going to be, that's on the agenda for this evening, for me, and I'm just one of 7 people, for me, 3 things that are important with regard to it. One, that there's going to be consistency, so that someone, be it you or anybody else, it may be someone on the dais, if there's information that were to come, someone's not picking and choosing what's going to be read out loud or what's not. So if there's a consistent policy or procedure, then that's a good thing, because that takes away the idea of somebody censoring or making decisions on what's going to be publicized or what's not. The second thing is, you know, the accuracy or the verification part. It's important to make sure that if someone is making a correspondence and that correspondence is going to be public, that is truly what's coming from that person. I hear what you're saying, that there's different steps that could be taken to verify that. Through the course of this discussion, I think from the last council meeting, there's been a big thing made about the idea of cross-examination. And I think President had referenced it, a law director referenced it. And I want to make sure that the context of those statements, and I'm not going to speak for Mr. Vanover or Mr. Braun, but the context of that, and I was looking at the minutes again this week, the context was about making sure that there's accuracy and verification in the person that's coming to speak, and that what is being expounded upon, more so than the idea of truly cross-examining someone who's coming up here, okay? And you can have it in civil cases as well as criminal cases. But I'm telling you, as someone who gets paid to do that, since 2000, I have yet to cross-examine a person who's come up here. And there have been things that I haven't agreed with. I still, if I'm asking a question, it's usually a clarifying question, because if you're here or somebody's here, it's because you have a concern or a question or you have input that you want to give. And I want to make sure that I'm clear with regard to what the issue is so I can think about it, okay? The third thing is efficiency. So if we operate on what we've had before, which is no policy, no policy means precedent's going to dictate. If we do that, then yeah, technically we could have the 1,000 PETA goldfish people that tweak a message that we got to read. And so in terms of the efficiency of that process, that's not an efficient way to go through and conduct business. Every time we have a council meeting, we've got administrative assistants that we're paying for. We have professional assistants who, be it our engineer, be it our law director, that we're paying, the city's paying for these things. And so to eat up time with those kinds of things is not the most efficient way to go about doing business. Now here's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned. Come back to what I started with. It is important to get your input, any other resident, business member, whoever's coming through Springdale's input with regard to questions, concerns, problems, or on the occasional compliment with regard to what's going on. Doesn't happen often, but we'll take those too. And so that can be done a number of different ways. It can be done by you coming in here today. It can be done by writing a letter. It can be done by picking up a phone and calling, email, what have you. There's a number of different ways for that to take place. The main thing that I imagine it is when someone stands at that dais, as you are, is they come into this room because they have a question or concern for administration, the mayor, clerk of council, finance director, or city council, because those are the people that can answer your question or address your concern. If somebody's bigger interest is they want to make sure that what it is that they think or they have a question on is projected out to other people, then there's other avenues and venues for that. Now, I acknowledge and I admit that if you stand at that podium, whatever you say is going to be public by the very nature of it. And if you stand at that podium, nobody up here can dictate what you can and can't say. There may be a time restriction, but if you want to get at that podium and say, Lawrence Hawkins, when he played at Princeton, was a terrible football player, he's a terrible councilman, you can do that. Nobody can stop you from doing that, okay? It wouldn't be the most efficient use of time, but you can go through and do that. So that would be censorship. We want your input. We want everybody's input. And so no one's limiting that. No one's going through and saying you can't do that. If you write a letter and that goes to everybody on council, the administration and the mayor and the clerk council finance director, you are accomplishing the goal of getting the information to the people that can address and fix your question or your problem without it being out here. I don't want you to have to take off work. I don't want you to have to be away from your family. If there's a more efficient way that you can go through and do that without impacting you, there's a whole bunch of different avenues to do that. So nobody wants you censored or anybody else censored. If there's a policy that's put in place that doesn't limit you, okay, that's what I want to make sure folks understand. You still have the opportunity to go through and do that. And the most important thing is that it gets to us, and it will. That's the thing I want you to understand. It will get to us. Thank you.
I don't see any more lights.
With, sorry, I'm not done. With the president being sent and no policy, someone determined not to read the letter. I'd like to know who that was.
Mr. Jacobs?
I don't mean to, I wanted to touch base on a couple things. First off, we are going to be discussing the possible, We're going to be discussing the possible ordinance tonight. Unless I'm misunderstanding, there'll be a chance for you to come back up and speak then as well. So I don't want to jump ahead to get specifics into the ordinance. But when the letter was received, when it wasn't read, my first thought was the mayor wasn't here that night. And there would not have been any answers to those questions. So while it was not matching our precedents, honestly, to me, nothing productive was going to happen that night, if that makes sense to you, because administration wasn't going to be able to address it, whether it was read or not. And then I echo the point, and I think this is where there's some confusion. If a resident reaches out to this body, is it because they want to be heard by us, or they want us to relay their message to the public? And I wanted to know if you see that as a fundamentally different thing. Because to me, they're miles apart, Mr. Huff. They're just miles apart.
I see the questions I asked were the same questions that I'd seen multiple people and talked to multiple people and asked.
I'm sorry.
The questions I asked in the letter were asked by multiple people, and I sent the letter to council in order to get that question answered for everybody. It wasn't just for me. I could easily send a letter to administration myself. This was to get the information out there for everybody because it's not forthcoming from this administration, this council.
If I may ask, so people reached out to you with those questions?
Yes.
And they wanted you to ask them in their place?
They agreed that they should be asked.
Okay.
When speaking.
And when you received the answers, did you share them with those people?
Yes, I did.
Then wasn't the mission accomplished? And I'm not trying to be combative here. I'm really trying to find the misconnect here. Because again, to me, there's a huge difference between expressing viewpoints to your local government and then expecting that government to be a megaphone for those viewpoints. To me, those are fundamentally different
But
things.
the questions have to do with budgets and how the council was run. Why are those not questions appropriate for the council?
I missed the last part. I do apologize.
If the questions are about the budget and how the money is being spent by the council and how it's being run, why are those not appropriate for council? The council is in charge of the budget. That's why it was addressed to council.
I didn't bring up anything about appropriateness with council. I'm trying to differentiate between addressing your local government, which you have a right to do, and then the expectation that you have that we express those views for you. Do you see a difference?
Well, I did it to streamline the process. Instead of having 30 people ask this council, come up here and ask the same question, I couldn't be here to ask it myself, so I sent a letter in to ask the questions. Otherwise, I would have been here myself if I didn't have to go to work.
No, I do understand that. I do.
Ms. McNair?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I guess, Mr. Huff, if you're looking for someone to place blame, you can blame me if you like. I did receive your message. I didn't censor it. I sent it out to everybody sitting up here. Everybody knew about the letter. When I saw the letter, I said, oh, you're looking for specific, detailed, numeric financial information. And the people who can do that are down that end of the row. So that's what we did. That was the most expedient way to get your information, get it started so they can start researching the information to get that to you. Unfortunately, I think there's a miscommunication in that having the letter read was more important to you than the answer. And I can't help that, but we sent the letter where it needed to go. Now, I can tell you I've sat up here a long time and I've read a lot of letters, and there's a lot of letters I haven't read. Sometimes we get letters that are anonymous. Those do not get read. Frankly, I almost didn't even take care of your letter because it didn't have your address. I didn't know you before, so I didn't know, that you were a Springdale resident or not. I do read letters from Duke because if there's a price increase, and the one time in all the years I've been up here, there was a price reduction, I read those because that impacts the city. But you were looking for specific information, and I passed it on to the people who got it to you, and I know they did respond to you. So I wanted to make sure that there's clarification there, that I made that decision, that we moved the letter to where it needed to go so that you could get the correct information as expediently as possible.
My next concern is with the attitude of council that they are somehow over the residents, not part of the residents. Multiple members of council and the mayor have stated they, the council, shouldn't feel obligated to answer a question posed by a resident. This is not the ideals of a friendly democratic government. You most certainly do have an obligation to answer our questions. It's why you're elected. If you don't have the answer, that's fine. I don't expect you to come up with facts and figures and numbers off the top of your head. But then you should come back to that resident, answer those questions. This ensures the transparency and open communications of officials. More disturbing is the idea that President Vanover is pushing that no letters be presented to council at all. That is a form of communication that is somehow not worthy of council's time. And while I understand and agree with the policy for handling letters, I don't think it should bar all letters from being publicly shared. Perhaps a certain set of guidelines and basis for letters to be shared, or a request that a letter be shared, be put in place with this new policy. But a ban on letter feels like censorship and less than efficiency, especially seeing as time spent reading letters and their resulting discussions have occupied a whole 12 minutes of council's time in the past 12 months. 2 letters from Duke that lasted 65 seconds, 2 letters from the community center lasting 9 minutes and 50 seconds, and 1 letter about ride sharing that lasted 90 seconds. I don't see how censoring letters or not reading letters would improve the efficiency of council. Further disturbing is President Vanover's idea that if it's important to you, you should be here. It's too easy to write a letter. We have priorities. We all prioritize our activities, and if it's important, you need to make time. This is preposterous. With this statement, you said, because I work, providing for my family, that my opinion doesn't matter to this council. The time now is 7:45. I've had to take 3 hours off of work to be here tonight. I should be at work right now, providing for my family and providing medical care to the people who depend on me, instead of being here and arguing with this council about letting me speak to them in a letter form. But I am here so you can cross-examine me like a criminal. Yes, it's easier to debate and talk, let's have a discussion if I'm standing here in front of you. But that's not the world we live in. People work late, people have other obligations. And what you're saying by blocking all letters to council is that you don't care what we have to say. You're belittling my opinions and my thoughts of the city. Will this council pay me for my lost time to be here? Or is my family supposed to take a back seat to this council because I care about the city I live in? I've spoken with other residents in the past weeks who also could not make it tonight. One has a sick child, one had a retirement party for a friend, and many others work. Do their voices mean nothing to you because they can't be here either? Mr. President, do you support military members abroad fighting for democracy? Do you support the elderly who are infirmed and unable to make it here? Do their opinions not matter if they can't be here in front of you? Do you support absentee voting? If yes, then how are political letters different? And if not, we reject those votes cast for you in November 2025 and only count those votes that are cast in person? I'd like to understand why you oppose community having a voice via letters in your ideal government. Finally, I'm going to address the letter. My letter asked 6 questions. These included 2 asking about how money would be spent, 2, asking about step increase over 5 years or monthly billing option that would allow families to reduce the burden caused by doubling the rates. And 2, we're asking for clarification on the parameters of the inquiry ordered by the mayor. None of these questions were confrontational or out of line. I even agree that it was time for an increase. None of these questions require lengthy discussion, but the questions that myself and others wanted answered, and wanted answered publicly for transparency. However, certain members of this council decided it wasn't going to happen. Instead, these members took this as a reason to bar letters from council and create a new policy. Why is this? Is it because they don't want the answer, they don't want public to know the answers? Or maybe they don't know want because they're scared of people knowing what's going on. Or maybe because what they're doing is wrong. Because they know that this fee for the community center is actually and legally a tax. A tax targeting those residents who use the community center. And I found this out only after this council refused to read my last letter. In the court case Covell versus the City of Seattle, heard in Washington State Supreme Court in 1995, and whose definitions were adopted by the state of Ohio and 48 other states, stipulate 3 criteria for determining if a charge is classified as a fee or a tax. 1, whether the primary purpose of the charge is to raise revenue rather than regulate, then it is a tax. In this case, as stated by administration, the purpose was to raise money for the general fund. 2, whether the money collected must be allocated only to the authorized regulatory purpose. Again, per administration, this money is for the general fund. And 3, whether there's a direct relationship between the fee charged and the service received by those who pay the fee, or between the fee charged and the burden produced by the fee payer. Again, per administration, these increases do nothing for the community center and are just a convenient money grab by the city. These criteria were adopted by the state of Ohio in the Ohio Revised Code, section 5747.2. This section reads, for the purpose of providing revenue for the support of schools and local government functions, and to provide for the general fund as a tax. I do have a diagram here for any of the members of the audience who'd like to see it, how this works. And members of administration and council can request a copy as well. However, the request must be done in person to ensure that the request is made by a valid requester. And unlike those requests made by residents, these requests will not be met with denial by the city's attorney, as mine recently have. So what does this mean? It means the fee increase is actually a recreation tax, the same recreation tax Mayor Webster decreed that would only occur over his dead body, moments after he presented this increase to council. And in doing so, he and the administration are attempting to levy a tax that can only be leveled by council, not by administration. And that's why my letter came to council. It is a tax, not a fee. And seeing as Mayor Webster has been in politics longer than Joe Biden, he knew what he was doing when he requested this increase. Now, I don't know if this is just a cash grab without benefit of the new community center that was intended for, or if this is punishment to the community for speaking out against the failed community center. Either way, it is a reprehensible attempt to rob community center members in order to rescue a floundering city budget. In closing, what we have is a city council president whose ideal government doesn't allow for the voice of the people, and a mayor who is no better than a common thief, hiding high on the dais, focusing on their own interests rather than the citizens of Springdale. My advice to you both, next time, read the letter.
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarity's sake, and I know there are a lot of things that were directed at other individuals, but the one thing that Mr. Huff had referenced that I think was more directed towards me with regard to that people from the dais don't have to answer questions. The context, again, of statements, to be clear, and look at page 11 of the minutes from the last meeting, in the third paragraph, the last line, indicating, quote, so we shouldn't feel an obligation to respond to anybody coming in immediately, end quote. And the point is, there's times we have to get information, the administration has to get information, before they can answer a question or explain something. There's other times where we have that data at our fingertips and we're able to address that immediately. At no point in time do I feel, and I wouldn't think that anybody's felt based on the conversations we had, that a resident, a business owner, or anybody coming in here or writes a letter with concerns or questions, those should be answered. Those should be answered. Those should be addressed. That person should be contacted. They may not agree with the answer or information they get, but nobody should be ignored. Everybody should be addressed. Thank you.
Mr. Jacobs?
I just do hope that Mr. Huff reads what happened after he left, because I feel like I was trying to have a dialogue with the resident. I also do know that the ship probably sailed long ago in terms of his perception of the body. The bridge is burned, and I understand that, and I wish it wasn't that case. I wish that wasn't the case. But I hope he reads this, because I've heard several times that he wasn't listened to. And I don't know how many more times we have to say it. We all read the letter. We all received the letter. I saw the letter posted on social media with the answers. So I hope he didn't feel like I was combating with him. I hope you don't, Mr. Huff. But nothing was censored. No one has been silenced. And I think what's really unfortunate is we're gonna have a first reading of the ordinance that Mr. Huff and others may not like, and he's left the room to then debate and discuss maybe his concerns about the actual ordinance. So nothing productive happened at all just now, even though I feel like I gave it a college try to try to maybe bridge some misunderstandings. I mean, if he comes back, I'll try again next time, Mr. Huff, but that's all I have. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Hawkins, you referenced the minutes from the last meeting. I'll reference October 5th, 2022. Mr. Huff stood before this body. He asked questions. They were answered right then and there. Two of those questions that he repeatedly asked were answered, and they're in the minutes that if he wants to get a copy of them, they are there. So he must not have liked the answer he got standing here. Well, it's not going to change. So, Council, I apologize for the longevity, and we have been given an example of why the policy needs to be adopted. With that, we'll move into ordinances and resolutions. First off this evening is the first reading, ordinance number 13. Yes.
Hi. If y'all don't know me by now, my name is Megan Chapman. I live on 479 Visclin Drive. And so my questions mainly pertain to the fee structure for the rec that is forthcoming. I don't know if it's already been approved or not, but I do want to know, will that money be used for the improvement of the rec center in any way?
Mayor Webster.
That was one of the questions that Mr. Huff asked several meetings ago. You explained to him, the chairman of the Finance Committee explained that very explicitly, that the money that is generated from these fees will go into the general fund, like all the other fees that come from the mayor's court, taxes, property taxes, building department, wherever. They go into the general fund, and then those funds are prioritized based upon the needs of the city. So I can't sit here and tell you that a $10 fee for whatever is going to go to put a brick in the building down there. I can't do that. It's going to go into the general fund. General fund is roughly $20 million a year. And it sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, but we provide a hell of a lot of services in this city, and it's expensive to provide those services. And as a matter of fact, we spent $2.2 million at the rec center providing the services down there. So we're asking for $80,000 more to help offset that 2.2. But the money, the $80,000, is going to go into the general fund, and the finance committee and this council will decide how that's going to be spent. But you're not going to be able, you could look at the budget all you want, you're not going to find that $80,000 in there.
Okay, I completely understand that. I'm
Why?
just
I'm
trying
glad
to
that, I'm glad
figure-
you understand it, because I don't think Mr. Huff does, but go ahead.
Okay, so I appreciate like you trying to do stuff, but I really would appreciate it if you did not cut me off because I am a grown up. Anyhow, I want to know like what are we gonna get for the increase in the rec fee then? I mean, like the increase in the rec fee should correlate with some benefit for the rec. It's not like if you were just saying that it's going to the general fund and that's all, and we're not going to see any benefit from it in the rec, then why are you increasing the fee?
Because it's been 13 years since we've adjusted the fees in the rec center. Every other community in the area has constantly, every year.
Every other community in the area has a much nicer rec center. They have childcare at their rec center.
So do you want me to answer your question?
I just moved here.
So our
That is
fees,
hella rude.
our fees are still less than a lot of the other surrounding communities, even though we haven't raised them for 13 years, and with this raise, they would still be, they're about in the middle of the pack, and that's what we asked Mr. Wilson to put together. We didn't want to be the
Okay,
most expensive,
and then-
but we're tired of giving away the service. Okay?
Okay, fair. But, okay, so you do realize that there is a very vast difference in the economics of this community, and you're raising something, you're basically doubling the price. Is there any way that you guys can just like gradually do this over a 2 to 3 year period?
No, unfortunately, we can't roll back the clock 13 years and do it incrementally every year, raise the fees, every year raise the fees. We elected not to do that. But
So
then
at
somewhere
what
along the way, you have to catch up with it.
Okay, so at what point did you decide, like, just, it's now we just decided that we're gonna do this and we're gonna give people like 2 minutes notice?
2 minutes notice?
Okay, so,
Yeah, this
I speak
isn't
in
going to
hyperbole
affect
a
till
lot.
January 1st. We announced it a couple months ago.
I understand that, and this is the first time that I've been able to
So
like
it's not 2
actually come
minutes.
here and talk to you. If you know me, you know I talk in hyperbole a lot, so my apologies, 2 months, I guess, what? So, yeah. Anyway, those are all my questions.
Mr. Jacobs?
If I could, and maybe we can talk off the edge here. If I could talk to everybody out there, there's nobody up here that doesn't want that rec center to be the best it can be. Nobody, okay? There's no promise, and there's never has been a promise that the increase in fees is going to lead to some improvement. But improvement is part of our plan going forward. We haven't laid out all those details for you yet. I want the best rec center. You want the best rec center. And maybe some context. And nobody likes raising fees. Nobody's happy about this. But I think it is relevant to say, like Mr. Huff, for example, suggested, can you do it incrementally, as you did as well? And I think it's fair to say that would have had to have been done in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. We would have preferred it, but we did get that savings from 2009 until today. I know that's not good enough for you, and I'm not expecting it to be, but I'm just trying to shift the way you're viewing it. I know it sucks for the rate to double. There's no doubt about that, okay? But one way to think about it, one way, is that it went from 25 cents a day to 50 cents a day, or it may in January. I also would like to mention to anybody listening, Mr. Huff, and I know my colleague here, Mr. Ramirez, one of the suggestions was that maybe to incentivize the year-long membership by having that at a lower fee, to maybe disincentivize just monthly memberships. I've expressed support for it. Mr. Ramirez has expressed support for it. I checked in the minutes. I know he's not here. I don't mean to speak for him. But there's productive things that can come out of this. And I want you to know, we all want that rec center to be better. It's going to be better. It's not going to happen fast. And I don't think anybody can expect it's going to happen with an $80,000 increase in revenue coming into the city. It's going to be much more than that. And we all want more than that. And I hope you understand that. I just thought that was important to express.
Yeah, and that's fair, and I understand that, but do you think that you may price people or residents out of being able to use the rec facility by doing that.
I don't mean to be evasive. I have no way of knowing. I really don't. I know it's a doubling. And I know this is framing, but it is. It's 25 cents a day to 50 cents a day.
I mean, I personally will have no problem affording that. I'm just looking out for other members of the community.
Oh, and I don't want to step on the mayor's toes here, but I feel pretty confident saying when we reach the rec center that we all want, it's going to be more than $80,000 a year better. I think we all want that, but it's going to take a long time. This building wasn't here 35 years ago, 40 years ago, or however long it was. There's a lot of investments we have to make, and we all want to make them. The last time the fees were raised, George Bush was president of the United States. I don't know what, but it is frustrating. You totally have every right to be frustrated, and we'd rather it not happen all at once. I understand that, but as the mayor said, we can't go back in time.
Ms.
But I understand your frustration.
It just kind of seems like poor planning.
Ms. Weisskopf?
Thank you, Mr. President. I completely hear what you're saying. I understand it. With the fees that we get in, if we were to take it down and only run the rec center off the fees that we get in on memberships, we wouldn't be able to run it. Probably not even a month. And that's a sad reality about how expensive life is. It's expensive. It's expensive to put water in the pool. It's expensive to put the lights in the place, to have working toilets, to have employees working there, the gym open. Everything costs a penny, and right now it's costing $1. It's just inflation. It sucks.
Yeah. No, I understand.
And I feel your frustration, trust me. Right now, my kids are gone, it's just me and my husband, but I would still have to pay the $180 or $280 a month or whatever it is. It's a lot, or $180, whatever, it's a lot. Yeah, $180 a year, yeah, way to go, $180 a year. It's a lot for just two of us. And that's something that everybody has to decide for themselves. Are they gonna belong to the community center and have the advantages of belonging to the community center or not? Everybody who knows me, and I know you don't know me very well, I am Miss Community Center. I am all about the community center. I'm all about our youth sports program. I wanna keep the community as involved in itself as it can. I've always been a big pusher for making the community center as best as it is, but I'm also a realist. I understand. You wanna go to Disney, but you got a Kings Island budget, you're going to Kings Island. And that's what we're looking at right now. We all want to go to Disney. We're packing for Kings Island. We're going to do whatever we can with the dollars that we're given. Trust me, everybody hears that times are tough. Everybody feels it. Everybody knows it. We're trying to do whatever we can to make it as painless as possible. And we'll just have to see in the new year how it all goes through or whatever, but right now it's tough all around, and we're trying to make it the best for everybody that we can, but we can't improve if we don't have any money to improve with. I know that doesn't help the frustration, but I do want to just kind of give a little bit of backstory on how I personally feel about it, and I hope the best for the community center, and we'll always be members. Thanks.
Mayor Webster?
Yeah, yes, if we're going to price people out of the market, are people not going to participate? That's a possibility. But here's my question to you: where are you going to go for your recreational activities? You're not going to go anywhere in the area. It's going to be cheaper. I happen to be aware there's a couple in Springdale. Both of them participate in the community center. They were seriously considered selling their house and moving outside the city to an area that didn't have a community center, but there was a local YMCA. So they made a couple phone calls to the YMCA. You know what they found out? The monthly fee for the two of them for the Y matched what they would pay at the community center for the entire year. And we're supposed to worry about people not going to renew their memberships? I'm sorry if you want to recreate, you can't. It's the cheapest game in town. Pure and simple, even with the raise. And that's exactly what we told Mr. Wilson when he started making calls around the other communities. We do not want to be the highest price. We want to be in the middle. We don't want to be the cheapest. We've been the cheapest for far too long. We want to be in the middle of the pack. And it's exactly the schedule that he's put together.
Okay.
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. You're hearing a lot in terms of the money and the finances, and at the end of the day, we've gone through, with all the discussion about the potential rec center move previously and discussion about some facilities, there's a lot of folks that will ask the question, well, it seems like folks haven't been prioritizing things or managing or planning, I think you used the words, well over the last 20 years or 15 years or 13 years. It's important to understand the context of all those things. We talk about the general fund, there is only this one pot of money, right? There's not something else that we go and pull from. It's important, as there was some reference to 2009, 2010. It's important when you go back and you look at what was going on in 2009, 2010, the state was pulling money from local governments all over the place, giving money to townships, but municipalities were suffering from that. We had the state tax taken. There were a number of different things that created a situation where we as a city had less money. The administration back then, and we had different administrators back then, made choices with the mayor, with council, in terms of how to manage that financial wave of taking money away from us to keep those things that are essential in terms of police and fire and trying to maintain roads and services that our residents were used to. When you go back to think about those times, I don't think there are a lot of residents who would sit there and say they were suffering any kind of deprivation with regard to anything they were used to having. Now, there were some things we did because employees here that were non-union employees had to take some furloughs, and they suffered, and we reduced some of the hours of the rec center back then to try to manage those things. But all in all, if you looked around, you'd think things were pretty normal. And that's a credit to the folks that were here back then to manage that situation, which there are a lot of cities that did not do a good job with that and suffered greatly in the years to come. And that was forecasting, pre-planning to say, hey, look, we may not feel this right now, 2009, 2010, but it's going to come. And if we don't do stuff now, come 2011, 2012, it's going to be a major problem. So folks have been very conscientious with regard to it. And I'm sure just the way you would be at home. Everything's budgeted out, and there's priorities. We're going to take care of the house. We're going to take care of making sure there's health insurance, those kinds of things. And the things that are the extra, maybe it's the vacation to Disney or what have you, that's the thing that is lower down the priority list because these other things are essential. The rec center is important. Everybody wants it. Everybody wants it to be the best it can be. But we got to make sure police, fire, the roads, these things are taken care of as a priority to it. But what you can take to the bank is, through the course of all this discussion we've had in terms of Artisan Village and the potential for a rec center move and a deep dive into the buildings and what have you, it is clearly on the radar of everybody. It's clear that it's a priority for the folks that are involved, elected officials, administration, and the residents have made it very clear that it's a priority. And so folks are going to try to find a way to move that up and take care of those dollars. We still got to take care of police, fire, those kinds of things. If someone calls 911, we make sure the ambulance gets out to them. But the rec center is very, very important. And so we're going to do what we can to make sure that continues to improve. It's not going to be overnight, but in time, we're going to get there so we can sit there and look at Mason's Aquatic Center and go, ours is better. It's going to take time, okay?
But just to emphasize Mr. Hawkins' point, over the last 2 years, we've spent $300,000 on putting a new roof on that center. $300,000. We didn't come knocking on anybody's door for donations, or we didn't raise the fees. We did it. We prioritized the money out of the general fund, and we put a new roof on there. We're looking at having to replace 13 to 14 air conditioning units in that community center. 13 or 14. Each one of them goes anywhere from $25,000 to $75,000 a piece. Average it out, $50,000 a piece, 14 of them. You figure it out. The money has to be prioritized out of the general fund. And this $80,000 will be in there helping out to pull that load. And this is exactly what we explained in almost the exact detail that we're giving you this evening to Mr. Huff 4 or 5 weeks ago. So I don't know what else we can say.
Yes, that's it.
Mr. Jacobs?
I'm going to ask, like, I appreciate you coming out tonight, and I hope you can take the passion that you brought here tonight and stay with us as we decide what that rec center is going to look like. Because we're going to look for citizen input, and, well, thank you.
Sorry, I was just saying, I'm not moving again.
Great.
All right, second call. Third and final call.
Hello, I'm Katie Wells. I live on Bernhardt. On a lighter note, I came here a couple of meetings ago, maybe, I forget, since I've been here, but I wanted to bring up for the PTA that we were having the walkathon and raising money for the playground, and I just figured in case anybody didn't know the update and they heard me before, that the goal was $3,000 and they doubled it, so that's awesome news. And I just wanted to bring that on a lighter note. The only other thing I want to mention, it's more of just a comment, is that the way that everyone up here, all of our elected officials, speaks to people matters. The way that they hear people matters. And I just wanted to remind you of that, and I know you already know that, but I think it's important. Thank you.
Mayor Webster.
I would also like to remind the audience, it matters how you talk to the elected officials too. And it also matters when you get at home in front of your computer screen and you're Hong Kong, because nobody can argue with you, and the names you call people and the statements you make, that matters too. So just keep that in mind.
I'm not sure if you directed name calling to me specifically, but I'd like to know when. When? When did I call anyone names?
Constant. Accusations. The Nino mayor did this, the Nino mayor did that.
I've never said that.
Oh, yeah, I'm not gonna argue with you.
Never said that. And I really do not appreciate lying about my intentions, because my intentions have been good this entire time, and I care a lot about this city. I care a lot about this city. And the way that I've been treated has been outrageous. And I don't appreciate lies.
Neither do I.
And I will always stand up for myself when someone's going to lie and disrespect my name. And I know a lot of people that are sitting up here right now knows that I've not called you any names.
We have to tolerate.
I have you on camera calling me names.
I had no plans to do this tonight, Levon Webster, Peak Drive, but I cannot take this anymore. My family cannot take this anymore, and we're not going to take it anymore. This is what was posted on her best friend's page, Brabs' page. Let them eat cake. Let me get my glasses. Hand me my first one, please. Let them eat cake. See it? Your friend, Brabs. Erin Morganroth. Erin Morganroth has never stepped foot in my house, nor will she ever step foot in my house. Oh my God, I knew there had to be a story when I saw your other post. Now you don't even have to tell me, I already know. Erin Morganroth, I'll be at the next no matter what. Marilee Pollitt. Marilee Pollitt. Do they really give money to good causes every year? Ray Brabs, Marilee Pollitt. I don't have.
All right, this is enough. I will clear chambers.
May I continue?
Let's
Marilee Pollitt. I don't have proof that they don't give to good causes, but anyone can start a nonprofit. Erin Morganroth. They had me at a Christmas party, which is another lie. Marilee Pollitt. True story, but Erin, I know about the Christmas parties. They've been going on for years. My mom used to go. Ray Brabs. or Marilee DeRay. I'd like to see where they donate their money to. Katie Wells, Marilee Pollitt, Aaron Roth, Mary Brabs. Any nonprofit has to make the Form 990 public record. You can request the year-end tax document 990. Marilee Pollitt. True story, but Aaron, I know about the Christmas parties. They've been going on for years. My mom used to go. Marilee Pollitt to Ray. I'd like to see where they donate their money to. Marilee Pollitt and Braves. Any nonprofit, again. This is an insinuation that we make money and take it from the SOS group, and you know it, and Brabs was in on it, and I resent this highly. And as far as calling him names, he's not a very good speaker. Oh, man, Webster, he's been there too long. Clear him out of there. On and on and on. All right, thank you.
I do not know what just happened. All those comments were directed at people that were not here tonight. That were, please, and none of them were directed at her. You brought up friends of hers and people on Facebook that made posts. I don't, I understand that it upset you. I do. But
Yeah, let them do it to you what they've done to us.
no,
Katie Wells, Marilee Pollitt, Aaron Morgan.
and it continues.
Communications from the audience is closed. All right, we're at ordinance number 34, 2022. This is a first reading. Ms. McNair, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 34, 2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and clerk of council, finance director, to enter into an agreement with CT Consultants for additional design engineering services related to the inclusion of shared use path for the Northland Boulevard reconstruction project. Whereas the city of Springdale City has previously entered into an agreement with CT Consultants for design engineering services necessary for the Northland Boulevard reconstruction project. And whereas the city desires a modification to the previously prepared plans for the inclusion of a shared use path. And whereas CT Consultants has submitted a proposal to perform additional engineering services to revise plans for the Northland Boulevard reconstruction project to include a shared use path. Be it ordained by the council of the city of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor and clerk of council, finance director are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with CT Consultants for additional design engineering services related to the inclusion of shared use path for the Northland Boulevard reconstruction project to the city of Springdale. The agreement, a copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, that the clerk of council, finance director is hereby authorized to pay CT Consultants a sum not to exceed $172,981 for engineering services associated with the agreement. Section 3, council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this council, that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, this ordinance shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
All right, council, this is the first reading. Is there any discussion this evening? All right, we will see it next meeting. All right, ordinance number 35, 2022. It does include the emergency clause. Ms. McNair, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 35, 2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and clerk of council, finance director, to enter into an agreement with Justin Bartlett to serve as mayor's court magistrate for the city of Springdale, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Whereas the city of Springdale operates a mayor's court which requires the services of a magistrate to hear matters pending in that court. Be it ordained by the council of the city of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor and clerk of council, finance director are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Justin Bartlett to serve as mayor's court magistrate for the city of Springdale, Ohio, the agreement. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, that Justin Bartlett is to perform the services and receive the compensation as set out in the agreement. Section 3, that the clerk of council, finance director is hereby authorized to pay the compensation for the services according to the terms of the agreement. Section 4, that this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D, 3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to ensure continuity of services available to the city without interruption as soon as possible.
All right, council, this is a reading. It does include an emergency clause. It can be enacted upon this evening. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Motion second, discussion. Mayor Webster.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. The next three ordinances all have to do with our mayor's court. This is for our magistrate, and the next one is for our prosecutor, and the next one is for our public defender. And so I would certainly ask council's support of all three of these. These people have been with us for several years. All three are renewing at the same price and conditions as previously, so no increase in either one of these three. And it's been several years since we've increased these fees.
All right, seeing no more lights, Ms. McNeary, your poll council.
Mr. Hawkins?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Weiscup?
Aye.
Mrs. Gantos? Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye. Ordinance 35, 2022 passes with 5 affirmative votes. Next up is ordinance number 36, 2022. Bless you.
Thank you.
It likewise includes emergency clause. Ms. McNear, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 36, 2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, clerk of council, finance director to enter into an agreement with Seth S. Teeger for prosecution services for the city of Springdale, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Whereas the city of Springdale operates a mayor's court which requires the services of a prosecutor for matters which take place in that court. Be it ordained by the council of the city of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor, clerk of council, finance director are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Seth S. Teeger for prosecution services for the city of Springdale, the agreement. A copy of the agreement is attached at Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, that Seth S. Teeger is hereby retained as prosecutor for the city of Springdale's mayor court from December 1st, 2022 through to November 30th, 2023. Section 3, that Seth S. Teeger is to perform the prosecution services as set out in the agreement. Section 4, that the clerk of council, finance director is hereby authorized to pay the compensation for the prosecution services according to the terms of the agreement. Section 5, that this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D, 3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to ensure continuity of prosecution services available to the city without interruption and as soon as possible.
Council, have heard the reading of ordinance number 36, 2022. It likewise includes the emergency clause. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion second, discussion. Seeing no lights, Ms. McNear, your poll council.
Mr. Hawkins?
Aye.
Mrs. Sullivan Weiscup?
Aye.
Mrs. Gantos? Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye. Ordinance number 36, 2022 passes with 5 affirmative votes. Next up, is ordinance number 37, 2022. Likewise, again, including the emergency clause. Ms. McNear, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 37, 2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and clerk of council, finance director to enter into an agreement with Darrell C. Tibbs for public defender services for the city of Springdale, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Whereas the city of Springdale operates a mayor's court which requires the services of a public defender for certain eligible matters which take place in that court. Be it ordained by the council of the city of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the mayor, clerk of council, finance director are hereby authorized to enter into an agreement with Darrell C. Tibbs to serve as mayor's court public defender for the city of Springdale, Ohio, the agreement. A copy of the agreement is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, that Darrell C. Tibbs is to perform the services and receive compensation as set forth in the attached agreement. Section 3, that the clerk of council, finance director is hereby authorized to pay compensation for the public defender services according to the terms of the agreement. Section 4, that this ordinance shall be an emergency measure necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, safety, and general welfare, and shall, subject to the terms of Article 2D, 3D of the Charter, be effective immediately. The reason for said declaration of emergency is the need to ensure continuity of public defender services available to the city without interruption and as soon as possible.
All right, council, have heard the reading of ordinance 37, 2022. It includes the emergency clause. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt. Second.
Motion second, discussion. Seeing no lights, Ms. McNear, your poll council.
Mrs. Sullivan Weiscup?
Aye.
Mrs. Gantos? Mr. Hawkins?
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs?
Aye.
Mr. Vanover?
Aye. Ordinance 35, 2022 passes with 5 affirmative votes. All right, next up, we have ordinance number 38, 2022. It is the first reading. Ms. McNear, when you're ready.
Ordinance number 38, 2022, an ordinance amending Chapter 30 of the Springdale Code of Ordinances governing procedures at the city council meetings. Whereas the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio Council has previously adopted certain rules and procedures contained in Chapter 30 of the Springdale Code of Ordinances related to the manner in which council meetings are conducted. And whereas council seeks to promote informed and transparent public participation at the council meetings, and whereas in furtherance of these goals, council seeks to amend the rules and procedures related to council meetings. Now therefore be it ordained by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, Section 30.05L of the Springdale Code of Ordinances shall be adopted to read as follows. 30.05L. Members of the public shall be entitled to speak during communications from the audience for a period of no more than 3 minutes unless granted additional time to speak by the President of Council or an affirmative vote of the majority of council. Section 2, Section 30.05M of the Springdale Code of Ordinances shall be adopted to read as follows. 30.05M. Citizen correspondence that is received by the Clerk of Council Finance Director shall not be read at the council meetings unless it constitutes official business upon which council is required to be informed or take action. Any signed citizen correspondence containing a return mailing address that is received by the Clerk of Council Finance Director that is not required to be read at a council meeting shall be distributed to the members of council along with any response that is provided. Section 3, that this council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this ordinance were taken in an open meeting of this council, and that all deliberations of this council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 4, that this ordinance shall be effective from and after the earliest period allowed by law.
All right, council, this is first reading this evening. Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll see it again. All right, Ms. McNair, up next, ordinance number, resolution R21, 2022. When you're ready.
Resolution number R21, 2022, a resolution adopting a connectivity plan for the city of Springdale. Whereas the city seeks to institute a connectivity plan which establishes a continuous network of safe pedestrian and bike paths to be developed and used in the future and outlines improvements to the existing transportation corridors. And whereas the city engaged the professional services of KZF Design to work with elected officials, residents, business owners, and city staff for the preparation of a connectivity plan for the city that would be recommended by Planning Commission and approved by City Council. And whereas the city has been reading and gathering input from residents, businesses, and other community stakeholders throughout the year in order to create a connectivity plan to guide the city regarding future pedestrian bike infrastructure and improvements to the existing transportation corridors. And whereas a connectivity plan has been prepared, presented to, and recommended by the Planning Commission and is ready for final adoption by City Council. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Springdale, Ohio, members elected thereto concurring. Section 1, that the Council of the City of Springdale does hereby adopt the connectivity plan recommended by Planning Commission, a copy of which is attached as Exhibit A and incorporated herein by reference. Section 2, Council hereby finds and determines that all formal actions relative to the passage of this legislation were taken in an open meeting of this Council, and that all deliberations of this Council and of its committees, if any, which resulted in formal action, were taken in meetings open to the public in full compliance with applicable legal requirements, including Section 121.22 of the Ohio Revised Code. Section 3, this resolution shall take effect on the earliest date allowed by law.
All right, council, this is the first reading. We do have a presentation this evening, Mr. Kucha.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been a long night already, so I'm going to dispense with any kind of ground setting. I'll be answering questions afterwards, along with Eric Anderson from KZF, but I'll just right now introduce Eric Anderson, who's the lead project manager from KZF, and he's worked with us on this for the past 9 months, and he's going to take you through the process and the end product. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here today, Mr. President, Council, Mayor Webster. As Andy mentioned, my name's Eric Anderson. I'm a Director of Planning Services at KZF Design. I'm also the project manager for the Springdale Bike and Pedestrian Connectivity Plan. I'm here today to present the contents of the plan and answer any questions you may have leading up to adoption. So before I get into the plan, I just wanted to give a little background on the project. So the city initiated this, the Springdale Bike and Pedestrian Connectivity Plan for 2 core reasons. Number 1, the city's comprehensive plan calls for a well-connected and cohesive connectivity network. And secondly, with all the development that's being planned throughout the city, there's a need to evaluate the way people walk and bike throughout the city and a desire to connect the residential areas with those new developments. So the plan was guided by 5 core goals. Those were developed and ranked by a team of stakeholders within the city, within the city government, city staff. The first one is establishing a west to east connection for residents to access other neighborhoods, parks, schools, and areas of commerce. The second goal is providing adequate pedestrian and bike infrastructure throughout the city. The third is improving existing transportation corridors to promote safe multimodal facilities for all users. The fourth goal is prioritizing connections to regional pedestrian and bike facilities as well as surrounding cities and villages. And finally, creating a continuous network of safe pedestrian and bike paths along major transportation routes. So we went through a 7-month process, and then we've had 2 months here of presentations getting ready, leading up to this meeting today. That planning process included mapping of existing conditions, site visits and field work throughout the city, community engagement, development of a series of recommendations, and then presentation of those recommendations. We held 2 in-person events to get feedback. The first one was an open house related to existing conditions and what residents, businesses, and business owners and visitors were seeing in the city. The second was a presentation of our recommendations. In addition to these in-person meetings, we used an online community engagement tool to present or to get feedback on what people were seeing within the city related to existing conditions. We asked for feedback about areas of the city that they liked or didn't like related to how you bike or walk in the city. They were able to indicate and map out their preferred bike or walking routes. They also were able to identify any potential connections that were needed. They also had the opportunity to identify difficult locations in the city for walking and biking. And then there was an opportunity just to provide general map comments. For recommendations, we also mapped those and went through a similar process online to get feedback. So moving on to the plan. So our first step was mapping existing conditions and then doing field work throughout the city. So our observations were, obviously, there are some neighborhoods, residential neighborhoods, that have sidewalks and some do not. Some sidewalks are 2 to 4 feet wide, which is functional, but don't allow 2 people to walk by cross paths. It also can make navigating in a wheelchair difficult. There also are a lot of missing pieces where you have a continuous sidewalk and there might be a gap. And that might require people to walk on the sidewalk or turn around and find a different path to get from one spot to another. In addition, that there is inconsistency between the types of facilities, like I said, width, design. The local network offers some local connectivity, but it's hard to get from the west side of the city to the east side. Also, if you're trying to commute from through Springdale, that also can be difficult due to missing pieces in the network. Also, local parks offer great connectivity with the local residential areas, but lack internal trails. I-275 and the interchanges serve as a significant barrier. But on a positive side, there is a good trail network. We got a lot of positive feedback about the multi-use facilities around the community center, as well as the multi-use paths on Sharon Road. So our recommendations consist of 2 types, on-road facilities and off-road facilities. So you'll see on the slide here on the left, we're showing 2 off-road facilities. So the top left is a shared use path where both bicyclists and Pedestrians would occupy a 12-foot wide pathway. The bottom left shows a 6 to 8 foot wide sidewalk that could either be on one side or both sides of the street. Obviously, the preference would be for both sides of the street. The two images to the right show on-road facilities. So the top right is a shared facility where you would have bikes and vehicles sharing the same space in the roadway. And the bottom right shows a protected facility where bikes and vehicles are in the same roadway, but there's a buffer between vehicles and bikes. The facilities that we identify in the plan follow public transportation corridors, as well as we offered some ideas for potential pathways through private property. As we developed these recommendations, we took a lot of things into account. So a lot of the routes that are in the final plan were identified during community engagement as priority corridors that people prefer to walk or bike on. We also looked at addressing physical barriers to commute from the residential areas to commercial areas, offering connectivity between residential and commercial areas to parks, schools, and other important destinations. We looked at how we could provide multimodal options for someone to get throughout the city. So that might be using a bike and then getting on a bus or walking to a bus stop or other modes of transportation. We also looked at right-of-way width. Is there enough room to fit these facilities along the roadway? And then we also, the last thing we looked at was connectivity to the surrounding planned or built bike and pedestrian infrastructure, like the city of Fairfield's planned improvements or Forest Park. And also we looked at connecting to the regional trail system, like the West Fork of the Mill Creek Greenway and the Glenwood Gardens to Winton Woods Trail. So the recommendations are presented in short-term and long-term maps. The short-term recommendations are routes that will be focused on over the next 10 years. This is where day-to-day operations, the city staff will be kind of, making decisions, or it will kind of just be part of the day-to-day conversations. Those priority routes include Kemper Road, Princeton Pike, Northland Boulevard, Sharon Road, Springfield Pike, Ken Road, Cloverdale, Longview, and Tri-County. So we recommended 4 core types: a 12-use multi-use path, as we showed previously, 6 or 8 foot wide sidewalks, and recommendations for on-road facilities. So looking at the recommended locations for shared use paths, Princeton Pike, Northland, Springfield, and Sharon Road. So these would be, again, 12-foot wide paths that are separate from the road. They're for pedestrians and bikes. There would be two-way travel, and they are a low-stress experience for a variety of users. The next kind of core recommendation are the sidewalks. So we've got Ken Road, Cloverdale, Longview, Tri-County Parkway, and a section of Springfield Pike. So these are 6 to 8 foot recommended width, separate from motorized traffic, again, low stress. And these could be combined with on-road, those shared facilities where you've got the bikes in the road as well. Those where you've got bikes in the roadway, we're showing those mostly on residential streets, but that would be a combination of signage as well as pavement markings that indicate that bikes are in the roadway to drivers. And then the last series is on-road facilities. Those would be 4 to 5 foot wide. Only bikes would use these. They'd be in the roadway. If it's one way, you would have a 4 to 5 foot wide bike lane on each side of the road, or like this image that's shown here, you could have them together on one side of the road. That would be two-way. These on-road facilities are meant for more experienced cyclists. So just a couple examples here. Like I mentioned, the two-way cycle track is in the top left. Bike lanes that would go on either side of the road are shown in the bottom left. And then for the more residential streets, signage and what we call sharrows are those green pavement markings that indicate bikes on the roadway. So those are kind of the core of the short-term recommendations. The longer term, the broader connectivity network plan follows the same ideals. We just expanded to the rest of the city, and these are the improvements that happen as property redevelops, as feasibility studies are completed, or as like long-term budgets are developed. So this network connects all of your parks, schools, and commercial areas, and it also offers a variety of options for getting around barriers like I-275 or congested intersections. So this plan is a first step in a long-term effort. There's a lot of further study that needs to be done. We were looking at the city as a whole. Kind of next steps are to drill down to specific corridors and start looking at individual properties for how to implement these recommendations. Things that we'll need to take into consideration are like phasing, which side of the street some of the sidewalks or shared use facilities would go on, whether it's one side or both, impacts to individual properties, driveways, yards, et cetera. There's still a lot that needs to be figured out, but this is the first step. A couple other things that we looked at. So we identified two potential locations for a potential bridge crossing over Princeton Pike. One of those is close to the I-275 interchange, so you can see there's kind of these little boxes right here, closer to the 275 interchange, and then another closer to Kemper Road. For both of these options, much more detailed work needs to be done to identify the preferred crossing, design plans, and secure funding. This is a complicated section of the city. There's a lot of utilities underground and overhead, so there's a lot to take into account before deciding where or when to construct a bridge crossing over Princeton Pike. But these were kind of after looking at the whole section of roadway here, these kind of came out as the ideal options. And the preferred option is closer to Kemper Road, and then the second option is up by 275. A few other quick general recommendations. Improvements to signage and pavement markings, so sharrows and share the road signs, as we've shown in some of the residential areas, directional signage, and improved lane markings and striping. Safety elements like high visibility crosswalks, enhanced mid-block crossings where people might be crossing the street and they're not at a signalized intersection, and installing pedestrian refuge islands at some of those pedestrian crossings. And lastly, some amenities and furnishings to encourage people to bike and walk. So that could include benches and lighting, bike racks and pumping stations, like Mr. Ian Ewing Johnson helped install, and improvements to pedestrian facilities and bus stops. So to wrap this up, next steps, obviously we're in the adoption process right now. But the city next step could be to start implementing some of the initiatives outlined in the plan, updating existing policies and programs, identifying funding sources for improvements, and starting to apply for grant funds in next year's round of funding. So with that, I'm here to answer any questions before you all discuss adoption.
Ms. Weisskopf?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to say that he came last week before Planning Commission.
Yes.
And it was unanimously voted to recommend this to council. It is something that Planning Commission got behind with very little discussion, any negatively. It was a public hearing. We had advertised as a public hearing and no one came to speak for or against, so we took that as a big thumbs up people usually come when they complain. They don't usually come and say, yeah, do it. So we took that as a yeah, do it, with no voices being heard against. So thank you for coming today, and I do encourage you all to vote yes on this.
Mayor Webster?
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't have any questions, Eric, but except to say, I think you guys have done a really great job, and I'm amazed when I saw the schedule initially. I figured there's no way in hell they're going to have a plan before council yet this year, and here you are. So congratulations, you've done a good job. But I did speak to the Plan Commission, and I just sort of like to repeat what I told them. As you recall, when we had the comprehensive plan before council, the chairman of the Plan Commission appeared before council, and he stood there at the podium, and he commented on how valuable that plan would be when we went to make applications for grants for the OKI, Ohio State Capital Improvement Fund, or any other revenue sources for that matter. And I reminded Planning Commission of that, of Mr. Oakham's comments, and I shared with them. I feel the same way about this. I think that having this adopted by Planning Commission, adopted by council, I think it speaks volumes for us as we go forward and we drill down into these projects and we get ready to go for funding. I think it's the funding source is going to look at all the work we've done here and said, man, these people got their act together. And I think it gives us a leg up on other communities that haven't spent the time and the effort to do what the city has done here. So I would urge council to adopt this, and it's something that will pay huge dividends for the city in the future, in years to come. Thank you.
Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you. Thank you. What a great presentation. It's very exciting. The ambition looks great. It's probably the dumbest thing I could probably bring up is to bring up a question about sidewalks right now after what tonight has been. What would I tell a resident, and the best you can do, I don't mean to put you on the spot, why is an 8-foot sidewalk better than a 4-foot sidewalk? And the reason I ask is I'm thinking about those residents. I'm thinking about the ramps. We had a gentleman come in last week that has a ramp, and he's worried that sidewalk's going to encroach on his property. So 8 is your recommendation. Or 6 to 8.
6 to 8, yes. So we recommended on the residential streets 6 foot wide, and on the ODOT roadways would be 8 foot. Typically for commercial areas, you go to 8 feet. That's like it's a design standard that the state of Ohio follows. We would be going for 6 foot in residential areas, but it does allow 2 people to walk by and pass. It does make room if you're in a wheelchair. You can pass by easier. But it's kind of the standard. So minimum would be 4 is ODOT's standard, and then 6 to 8 is considered for residential and commercial.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. With regard to the area, particularly over by Artisan Village, formerly Tri-County Mall, I noticed that the area that's immediately on that part of the property, the long-term things sort of go and connect beyond 275 to the north side of that. But the initial part around Artisan Village looks like it's going pretty much around that whole space. Is the idea that would be out closer towards the roadway and the train tracks, or to be closer towards the building in terms of what that multi-use path would look like?
Yeah, so we're showing, let me look here. So we're showing on Princeton Pike itself, 12-foot multi-use path going north of Kemper, and we've got a either on-road or 12-foot multi-use path on West Kemper. So those would be next to the roadway,
Okay.
And then the loop that you see is on private property. That's what the Artisan Village team has identified as a potential bike shared use path.
Which is theirs to build.
Which is theirs to build. That's why it's marked as future private.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Riggs?
I don't have the resolution or the recommendation from Planning Commission, but I know there was 2 conditions or considerations with the recommendation for approval. One being the widths that they're recommended. It should be clarified that they're minimum recommended widths. And the reason why that is because ODOT's design guide for multimodal facilities gives you a lot of flexibility with those widths, depending on the context in which the route is proposed or the right-of-way, the constraints within that. So while these are recommended minimum, and I think that's what it really is, we do need some flexibility in future design. For example, like the Northland Boulevard project, where the route's recommended to be 12-foot wide multi-modal path, we may only be able to get a 10-foot in. ODOT's minimum is 8 foot. So we can even go lower, but just throughout, more detailed analysis of every corridor, we want to have that flexibility. So that was one of the tweaks to the final plan that need to be made or is recommended to be made with the adoption. The other minor thing, I think, was the clarifying the existing condition in front of the Springdale Elementary School. The plan currently shows it being a 12-foot shared or a shared use path going in front of the school when it's really just a sidewalk currently. So just need to update that. But those are the 2 main things, with the biggest change being the recommended minimum, just to give that flexibility.
Yeah. If there isn't room for a 6-foot wide sidewalk, you should be able to go down to a smaller width to make it work, yeah.
The city's current standard's 5, or 6 foot at the back of curb.
Yeah.
Ms. McNair?
Thank you, Mr. President. So on Ken Road, there's already a sidewalk. Would that sidewalk be expanded to a wider width?
Yeah, so again, our recommended minimum was 6 feet. So if there were sidewalks that didn't meet those, and it was part of the pathway, Ken Road specifically, we heard a lot of feedback that folks wanted to be able to get from the west side of town to the east side. And so just bringing those up to a current standard is the recommendation.
Okay, and then on Cloverdale, there aren't sidewalks there now. So how much of a grassy berm would exist from the street before the sidewalk starts? Whatever width that concrete would be.
So I believe we showed like a little 2-foot landscape
2 foot, okay.
area. Yeah, again, you're gonna need to look at the entire pathway for that and do more detailed investigation and design work.
It was hard, you could see there was a little grassy strip, but you couldn't really tell how wide that was.
I'd like to just add a little more flavor to this. This plan is kind of a aspirational plan. In the best case scenario, here's what we should do to provide the best, biggest, safest multimodal capacity in each corridor of the city. And obviously, as you get farther away from neighborhoods, you can have a narrower expanded sidewalk down Longview Avenue because it's probably going to be just that neighborhood that's filtering onto that. But once you get onto Kemper Road, you have multiple neighborhoods that have filtered onto Kemper Road if they're all heading to Artisan Village, for example. So then you need to think about making it wider. And once you're at Princeton, Pike, and Kemper, that's kind of the maximum capacity where you have people filtering in from potentially all parts of the city and even outside of the city if we eventually connect other trails to get to Artisan Village or other places. So that's why the recommendation is for wider as you and it kind of follows the roadways too. I mean, once you have more lanes, you're probably going to need a wider sidewalk as well, or path, or whatever it's going to be. Each of these is going to have to start getting worked into the budget process, and the first step for any of these segments is going to be identifying what segment do we want to tackle first, and how far are we going to go, and budgeting for an engineering and design study to be done, whether it's CT or we bid it out or whatever, but that is going to be the first step. And I would hope and I would imagine that any RFP that we put out there is going to say, okay, design it, come up with a detailed cost estimate for doing what the plan calls for, but then also give us a couple alternatives that are cheaper. Because, as was mentioned earlier, that section of Princeton Pike from 275 to Kemper Road is a mess. It is going to be the most expensive single location in the city to do anything, because it is filled with infrastructure above and below ground, and we have very little right-of-way to work with, so we'd have to be acquiring, and you got businesses with parking lots right up to the road, And so that may very well be a scenario where if we do what it says and do a 12-foot separator from the road, we'd have to take out like 10 businesses and pay millions and millions of dollars, which would probably not be realistic financially or politically. But another option could be where you turn right out of the parking lot at Jared Jeweler, and that's the last right turn, the southernmost, closer to Kemper Road. It turns into a right-only lane. Maybe that lane gets converted into a bike path, and then you kind of merge it onto Kemper as you start heading west. And that could be the option that isn't, a $20 million bike lane in that one little section of road. So all these things are going to have to be designed in detail as we start pursuing section by section, and those are going to kind of be the next steps. But we had to lay the groundwork first and do the research and the process and the study to figure out what makes the most sense where ideally.
So on Cloverdale then, would there be additional lighting included in that? Because it's very dark.
To be determined in actual design.
Okay.
We didn't go into, that was way outside of their scope, is to go into those kind of details.
Yeah, my last comment about that is the shared roadway that you show where bicycles and cars are using the same roadway. I think that's a horrible idea. I mean, cars are running into each other. They're going to have a difficult time seeing people on a bicycle. And same thing with, motorcyclists don't do well when the weather turns nice and they're out. So that would really frighten me if we would put those types of lanes in.
And so just to clarify, the bike lanes or the cycle tracks, we do have a buffer, and we showed some sort of little physical barrier between the vehicles and the bicyclists. The other thing is those are meant more for the experienced cyclists. I think the general population is going to feel more comfortable riding on the sidewalk. The other thing to note with where we show sidewalk and sharrows, where you've got on the residential streets, we'll have signage and pavement markings to indicate that, but those are also roadways that have lower volumes of traffic. They're residential streets, so it's not the same condition as Kemper Road as an example. But the intent was to have the sharrows on the residential streets where there's low traffic, and then kind of the facilities with the buffer on the busier roads for cyclists. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. Koch just sort of touched on this briefly, and I don't know if you have an answer for this, but obviously these things are going to be done sort of piecemeal as we go through the process, and there may be things we get grants for and what have you. But through the course of putting this together, do you have an estimate in today's dollars what all that would cost if I were to write a letter to the North Pole and ask Santa to pay for all that? What would that project in full, what would you estimate that to look like?
So the report, what we did is for specific segments of these roadways, we have outlined what it would cost to construct, just as an example, like the sidewalk on Ken Road. So what you would do is pick a roadway, figure out how to fund it, and then design it as a next step. And you have the cost for that. I did not total them all up because typically you don't do a gigantic project like this. You usually carve out important ones and start building them piece by piece.
But I did total them up. It's a whole bunch of tables, pages 38 to 41, I believe, in the report, and I added them all up, and
Does the
I
number
think
start with a B?
it was I think like $42 million, and that did not include the proposed bridge crossing over 275, which I think that was $7 or $8 million all on its own, and it did not include a pedestrian crossing over Princeton Pike at Artisan Village. So, and that's in today's dollars, that's estimates based on recent projects they've done. But yeah, I think it's safe to say we're well north of 30 million for sure to get this whole thing implemented.
Thank you.
Well, and we're talking about a 4-foot sidewalk, and all of this, part of it is contingent upon the maintenance. Because right now, and somebody out here will back me up, there are sections of sidewalk that are 3 feet but there is vegetation that encroaches in that if you get 18 inches, you've done well. So that's, that's all going to play part of it, because we're going to have and maintain the old until all of this can be. And is there, I don't think there is, but refresh me, there's nothing over on the Crescentville Road project dealing on our side right now currently, correct, Mr. Riggs?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, it's all north of us,
It's all
so.
north, yeah.
All right. Any other questions, council? All right, well, I've got one more. This is a resolution. It can be enacted upon this evening. What is your pleasure?
Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion second. Any further discussion? All right, Ms. McNear, poll council.
Mrs. Sullivan Weiskup.
Aye.
Mrs. Gantos. Aye. Mr. Hawkins.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobs.
Aye.
Mr. Vanover.
Aye. Resolution R21, 2022 passes with 5 affirmative votes. Get the checkbooks out. Thank you. All right, at this point, we're in old business. Is there any old business to bring before council this evening? New business. Mr. Hawkins?
Thank you, Mr. President. More of a question for our law director and more, I think, for others' edification. As we've had some of these discussions about different policies, is there anything that an individual is prohibited from saying at the dais? I'm surmising that they probably are not with the First Amendment, short of us having a policy that is narrowly tailored to address a compelling interest, such as what we're talking about with regard to the reading of letters. Is there anything that you would deem would have to be cut off?
Yeah, council can adopt rules as far as there's 2 different types of rules. You're asking just in general, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, threatening, slanderous, profane, things like that. You can, as a body, adopt a rule that would prohibit that from the lectern or from the dais. And then, in the absence of a rule, no. And currently, you don't have such a rule. And since we're talking about this in new business, one of the things I might propose to you is that we may want to consider amending the proposed ordinance that's had a first reading tonight to include something like that. And so I was actually looking that up. It's as if you're looking at my thoughts here. But I might suggest something that says the president of council, not that I'm just reading this, but reserves the right to rule out of order disruptive, threatening, profane, abusive, slanderous, or otherwise unprofessional conduct. That is something that we could grant the power to the presiding officer to control both at the podium and from the dais. So I'm going to suggest to you that that might be something you would want to consider on second reading of the current ordinance that's going to amend Rule 30. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, and I just wanted to, I know people are going to ask questions about what folks can and can't say, and my read on was that you got the First Amendment freedom of speech, and
so
we don't have rules to dictate that otherwise.
As you're aware of, like any type of speech, it's not unlimited. You know, you'll recall from law school that they teach us you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, as they like to say. However, there are types of speech that you can say you can't engage in, but again, you can't have content, you have to have content neutral rules. And there are certain types of speech that you are able to regulate if they're viewed to be disruptive of the meeting. And so what I would say to you is it might be wise, as part of the amendments to Rule 30 that you're looking at, to provide some guidance to the public and to members of council as to what types of conduct are disruptive, then they would pass muster. And the types I read would qualify.
And I for one, would be interested in anything that you would bring to council with regard to information along those lines, as well as, I didn't reference this during the time, but of reviewing ordinance number 38, 2022, but also some operational definition with regard to what constitutes official business.
Yeah, and for the edification of the other members of council, Councilmember Hawkins asked me prior to the meeting about that, and I've had a little time to think about it. He indicated what types of speech are we looking to say would be read by the clerk of council. And when I drafted that, I was specifically thinking, just as Mrs. McNear pointed out, that most frequently council is tasked with reading liquor license correspondence that comes in where you're asked to say, do you have any objection to it? I was advised by other members of the administration that we do get PUCO notifications as well of rate increases, and asking if there's going to be a public hearing on that, and we're invited to provide comment. To me, that would be official business. And I know that we've in the past received communications from the Hamilton County Board of County Commissioners on various issues going on in the county. So those are the types I was thinking of. What I might do is go back and look at that and see if we need to add any other language to clarify in light of Mr. Hawkins' comments. But unless there's objection by other members of council, I would also like to bring back to you at the next meeting some proposed language regarding the types of speech that we would view as disruptive or impeding the ability of council to conduct business.
Ms. Weisskopf?
Okay, I have a question. So then when you come, would we then vote to revise this one, or is this a whole new one and we start over from stage one?
What I was going to propose, I'll bring a red line version that you can either adopt or you can treat it as a first reading, whichever you decide to do.
Thank you.
Council, any other objection? All right. Still in new business? All right, meetings and announcements. Mr. Hawkins?
Finance Committee will meet on November 30th of this year at 5 p.m. in the Administrative Conference Room.
Mr. Jacobs?
Thank you, Mr. President. Board of Health will meet on December 8th.
Ms. Weisskopf?
Thank you, Mr. President. Planning Commission will meet in these chambers at 7 p.m. on December 13th, and the rental program committee will meet on December 2nd at 1 p.m. in the conference room adjacent to these chambers.
Ms. Gantos?
Thank you, Mr. President. Board of Zoning Appeals will meet on Tuesday, November 22nd at 7 o'clock in the chambers here.
Mr. Yule?
Thank you, Mr. President. Civil Service will be meeting on Thursday, December 1st, 2 p.m. in the council conference room.
All right. With that, we'll move to communications from the audience. Is there anybody in the audience like to address council for any reason? Second call. Third and final call. We'll close communications from the audience. Mr. Hawkins, we'll go to you for an update on legislation still in development.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you review your internal memorandum, item number 1 was addressed with 3 separate ordinances regarding authorizing contracts with the mayor's court, magistrate, prosecutor, and public defender with emergency clauses. Ordinance number 35, 2022, addressed the magistrate. Ordinance number 36, 2022, addressed the prosecutor. And ordinance number 37, 2022, addressed the public defender. All of those passed the 5-0 vote. Item number 2 is addressing ordinance number 34, 2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and clerk of council finance director to enter into an agreement with CT Consultants for additional design engineering services related to the inclusion of a shared use path for the Northland Boulevard reconstruction project. That was a first reading. Item number 2 was addressed with ordinance number 38, 2022, an ordinance amending Chapter 30 of Springdale Code of Ordinances governing procedures of city council meetings. That was a first reading. Item number 4 was addressed with Resolution R21, 2022, a resolution adopting a connectivity plan for the city of Springdale, and that passed the 5-0 vote. All the other matters were forthcoming.
Okay, and staying with Mr. Hawkins, a recap of legislative items requested for our next council meeting.
There will be a second reading with regard to ordinance number 34, 2022, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and clerk of council finance director to enter into an agreement with CT Consultants for additional design engineering services related to the inclusion of a shared use path for the Northland Boulevard reconstruction project. There will also be a second reading with regard to ordinance number 38, 2022, as potentially amended with the red line version, an ordinance amending Chapter 30 of the City of Springdale Code of Ordinances governing procedures of city council meetings. There'll also be an ordinance authorizing the mayor and clerk of council finance director to amend the agreement with CT Consultants Incorporated to provide engineering services for the City of Springdale and declaring an emergency. That would be it, unless there's anything else from council administration. We also will have some additional matters we need to take care of in terms of resolutions, either confirming mayoral appointments and/or council appointments to various boards and commissions and committees, which the list that we have will also now include Mr. Darby, I would imagine as well.
Mr. Darby, if I remember right, is a mayoral appointment, correct? Okay, but yeah, council, we have some work to do. I've been in contact, and Ms. Matheny is willing to continue on charter revision. I'll reach out to Mrs. Darby and see if she's still interested in continuing, and Mr. Gregory Johnson. And then that should get us, but we've got that coming. We'll have to address next meeting. Mayor Webster.
We'll have a ordinance for Mrs. Hart and Mr. Kettering, I don't know, sometime before the end of the year. Their terms don't expire on December 1st. They go until the end of the year. So sometime in December, I'll have those two in.
Okay. All right. We have item 16 before us.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Council's adjourned.